do well. God of wisdom, we ask that you direct our path today, and that at the end of the day, your name will be glorified and the people of Jamaica blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, member. Are there any apologies for absence?
Not for absence, Madam Chair, but Senator Gale has asked me to apologize. He'll be running late.
Okay. All right, and I do note that we have a quorum. So let me welcome our presenters this afternoon. We're blessed to have the School of Education from the University of the West Indies. We have Dr. Marcia Rainford, Director, School of Education. Dr. Diane McCollum, Lecturer, School of Education. And do we have Professor? No, okay, we don't have Professor Sylvia Cohen. And so, the floor is yours.
Minister, members, very pleasant afternoon to you all, and let me just say thank you for allowing the School of Education to make our presentation to this committee this afternoon. The School of Education at the University of the West Indies Mona campus is in support of the Jamaica Teaching Council. We think it represents a bold and necessary step for the advancement of the professionalization of teachers and the regulation of the teaching profession in Jamaica. Given the responsibility that the state has for the nation's children, it must play a role in the regulation of the teaching profession. I'm sure all of us here would agree that teaching has its own unique set of specialized knowledge and intellectual techniques. It demands appropriate training. It requires initiation into the culture, and teachers are obligated to serve society. And in fact, members of the teaching profession live up or ought to live up to an established and accepted code of ethics. We also support the continuous professional development of teachers and the steps taken to legislate such actions, as it should significantly, we think, contribute to teacher quality. We know and note that when teachers finish initial training, beginning teachers need sometimes as much as 5 years to become fully competent in their craft, and several more years before they become master teachers. So continuous professional development is absolutely essential to ensure professional learning and growth of the teacher. We also wish to commend the framers of the Act for its provisions on home education, as the usefulness and viability of this form of education was driven home to us very clearly over the past 2 years by the experience of relying on parents to engage more directly in the education of their children under pandemic conditions. And so this afternoon, in this presentation, I'd like to highlight 6 areas from our initial submission which would be possible in the time allowed. These are groups to whom the bill applies, the functions of the JTC, clarification on the role of instructors, the composition of the board, disciplinary proceedings, and the Appeal Tribunal. Firstly, groups to whom the bill applies. And as you will see from your screen, we have highlighted in yellow the concern, the main concern, and above that we will have the sections from the bill that I'm referring to and the recommendation at the bottom. And going forward, all the slides would have this format so it becomes easier to follow. So there is need for clarification on whether the bill applies to 2 special groups of educators. These are teacher educators and persons teaching in early childhood institutions. In Part 1, subsection 4G on page 8, it stipulates that the Act applies to persons who teach in teacher education programs, who are preparing persons to become teachers. This suggests that teacher educators will be subject to the same licensing requirements as teachers. However, we would argue that the expectations from teacher educators who are responsible for initiating, guiding, and supporting teacher learning across the professional lifespan are in several respects different from those for teachers. For example, the professional qualifications for a teacher educator should be at least a master's degree. The teacher educator should be involved in conducting research and have experience teaching in the classroom. We note in the past that attempts were made by the Ministry of Education and the JTEC to develop standards for teacher educators, but this fell through, and there is now no certification requirement for teacher educators. It proved to be very difficult to develop such standards for teacher educators because of the wide range of institutions we have in Jamaica, well, perhaps in part, that offer the service. We have colleges, universities, university faculty, community colleges, and even offshore institutions. And in our opinion, if the intention is to develop standards for teacher educators, then that should be best left until after the standards for teachers are developed and ratified. We note as well that JTEC, as a regulatory and supervisory body for the tertiary sector, is at the forefront of the work to develop standards for teacher educators. And we also wish to draw attention to the fact that CARICOM in 2020 has also developed standards for teacher educators. And I think that these could also be considered. So while the professional standards for teacher educators would bear some alignment with those for teachers, there would be many differences. And I reiterate, our recommendation is that the bill should not apply to teacher educators. The second point concerning the groups relates to those persons who are teaching in early childhood institutions. So the definition for teachers on page 7 says, those are persons who have been admitted to an educational teaching program duly recognized in the country in which the person is qualified, has successfully completed a bachelor's degree in education or its equivalents, or alternatively, a first degree with a postgraduate diploma in education, and thereby satisfies the qualifications to be registered as a teacher under this Act. Now, this definition eliminates most teachers in early childhood institutions. The majority of teachers, and by a conservative estimate about 75%, have vocational training, which does not equate to a bachelor's degree. There is also the issue of governance for the early childhood institutions. Early Childhood Education Act and not the Education Act governs early childhood education institutions. An important question, therefore, is which of the acts would take precedence in this regard? The Education Act does not relate to pre-primary institutions. Pre-primary education is the foundation, we argue, for any education system, as it provides opportunities for the development of critical, social, and emotional skills of children. When carried out successfully, it lays the foundation, the groundwork for expanding the child's education at every other level. It should not be treated lightly. So at this point, we recommend very careful consideration to be given as to whether such persons, that is with vocational training, will no longer be qualified to teach at the pre-primary level. Now, we recognize that this will have serious consequences for pre-primary education at this time. And there is clearly a need for greater investment in early childhood education, and the government must have greater stakes in ownership of the early childhood sector. The government must also provide the resources for the Early Childhood Commission and offer, we think, full-time scholarships for teachers to be trained. We acknowledge that Chase has done a phenomenal job in providing partial scholarships for teachers in that sector. These are still insufficient, however, to address the needs. But further, the government pays one trained teacher in each basic school. This means that when teachers have spent money for training, based on what these early childhood teachers earn, it would take about 1 year for the teachers to recoup the cost for 1 year of training. There is therefore no incentive to be trained, for trained teachers to remain at that level. And this perpetuates a system that attracts the least qualified persons. This is a long-standing problem that, though difficult to be addressed, we feel it must be addressed. The second section relates to clarifying the functions of the JTC. Now, there are 3 points that I want to raise here. And we want a further clarification on sections related to Part 2, Section 7, pages 10 to 12 of the bill, which addresses the functions of the Council. Our first point refers to the significant groups that we think that are omitted from the list with whom the Council will confer, which is in subsection 7.1i, which states that the JTC will serve to develop and maintain, adapt, or incorporate and apply a professional learning framework to support and promote the continuing professional development of registered teachers, licensed teachers, and instructors. Subsection 7.1q lists various groups with whom the Council will confer and collaborate in carrying out its functions. These include employers, registered teachers, licensed teachers, etc. We would also like to add 3 other groups to that list, because while we recognize that it is not possible to include every organization, we think that if the Council ignores one or any of these professional associations for unstated or even idiosyncratic reasons, this might be a loophole. And the 3 are professional disciplinary associations, teacher education institutions, and universities. Each of these entities should have much to contribute to the development of the continuous professional development framework, as they are all engaged in professional development of teachers. We are particularly keen on ensuring that teacher education institutions be included here, as these are the only institutions charged with the education of prospective, who we call pre-service teachers, and much of the responsibility to ensure that teachers understand and meet registration and licensing criteria reside with them. Professional associations such as the Science Teachers Association, Modern Languages Association, and others provide a space through which teachers share professional knowledge gained from practice. And they also serve as an opportunity for developing professional networks. And so we think that those groups should be added. The second point here relates to subsection 1M on page 10. And it may be a small point, but I think it's worth stating. It states that one function of the members of the council is to conduct professional appraisals. Now, currently, education officers conduct performance appraisals for principals, and we're not quite sure if this is going to mean that the JTC, what role the JTC will have here, and I think that there is further need for clarification on what is meant by professional appraisals. Even as described in the definitions, more needs to be said, and perhaps more needs to be said about how it relates to performance appraisals. Further, we think that the council may be taking on too much if they go in that direction. Our recommendation is that we should leave any appraisal of teachers or school administrators to those individuals who have direct oversight. So perhaps there is a way in which this might change if we are made clearer about what these professional appraisals really mean. If it is something that's done annually, that sort of thing might, cause us to think differently. But at this point, as we understand it, we would want to suggest that this is not carried out by the JTC. The third point refers to what could be a conflict of interest on the part of the council. Now, Section 7.1 states that the council will give oversight, develop, and deliver professional development programs and activities in relation to the professional standards and code of ethics established by the council. Further, on page 10, section 7.1i, the council is expected to develop, maintain, adapt, and incorporate and apply a professional learning framework to support and promote the professional development of registered teachers, licensed teachers, and instructors. And finally...
Sorry, you just help me here. You're dealing with 10.2D.
Sorry, I wasn't seeing the person. Sorry, could you go again for me?
Yes, I'm just trying to make sure I'm following you.
Yes, page 10.
Page
Section 7.1i.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I may be going a little bit too fast. Let me try and slow down my speech. Section 10 as well. Subsection 2D on page 13, the council will determine whether to approve or recognize professional development activities. So taken together, the council is responsible for developing the framework for the CPD, engaging in developing the CPD programs, but at the same time giving oversight to these programs. That is, developing, delivering, and approving. We think that the development of such activities by the council represents a conflict of interest and suggest that the council should not be engaged in developing professional development activities, but should leave such activities or programs to other institutions involved in teacher professional development. The council will, however, approve such programs once they're developed, and the council might also engage other institutions to deliver specific CPD programs for teachers as part of the licensing framework as it sees fit. But we caution that the steps used to carry out such requests should be made transparent, so the selection process is clear to the public. The next point refers to clarification on registers and the role of instructors. And on page 5 of the bill, it defines the instructor as a person who is not a teacher and authorized to teach, and whose name is entered in the roll of instructors. So it does not appear that instructors need to be trained teachers. And although this is not ideal to have persons who are not trained teachers teaching at any level in the education system, we think that given the shortage of teachers in some areas, and indeed the slow pace at which some teachers are trained, this is necessary to have instructors. I got a call yesterday from a gentleman who wanted me to point out as well that there are many private institutions that many children over the years have gone to for services of some sort. They have taught their children, they have passed exams, they've got scholarships. And he thought that perhaps there is need for the council not to overreach in that regard. And I also thought about, as we discussed, you might have seen on television a few months ago a story of a young boy, a grade 9 student, I think, and he was teaching in his community. And this is anecdotal, but I think we need to consider how such things might play out in the run of things. So just to say that there is really a need to be very clear on how such activities would be affected as we move forward with this bill. We're of the view that the Act should seek to better develop and outline the conditions under which instructors may be engaged. For example, we think that instructors should be required to undergo even introductory level or what may be considered basic training before being employed or within a reasonable time frame after being employed as an instructor. The Act should be explicit on the qualifications of such persons who can be selected as instructors and specify any training that may be required. You can see from my presentation so far that we are very strong on training. We note that support the inclusion that instructors need to be authorized to teach for 2 years. That's in section 44, subsection 3 on page 40. And also, they need to renew authorization after 2 years. And we agree with this. However, perhaps there should also be a stipulation on the maximum number of years that an instructor can serve in that capacity, as this might serve to put in a positive way, to encourage the instructors to become trained teachers. Another point needing clarification that we looked at, which I didn't have on the slide, but it speaks to the eligibility requirements on page 26, section 27, and it speaks to the fact that the person should have the English language skills, and that's in reference to persons who are suitable to teach. And we think that this language is vague, and the metrics for this determination should be explicit to reduce the likelihood of subjective interpretation. Next, we look at the composition of the board. And I know that this was addressed by the group that presented the teachers' colleges last week, so I think we're agreeing on much of this. On pages 61 to 62 of the bill, it stipulates that the board comprises 22 members, 10 of whom are teachers. And there are two key issues here of concern that I'd want to raise. Firstly, it's the even number of the membership of the board, and secondly, the scope of the representation of teachers, because this places teachers in the minority. This contrasts, as was said earlier, contrast with other councils, such as the General Legal Council, Medical Council, Nursing Council, where members of the profession are in the majority. Additionally, the number of representatives from the Jamaican universities is 2. Only 1 is guaranteed from the UWI, with no reference to the School of Education. We think that these anomalies should be addressed, and we refer to pages 6 to 7 of our original presentation, and some of the suggestions and the recommendations for making those adjustments are here. In the interest of time, I will not go through them, but I'm pretty sure that they would help to address the issues that we have raised. The next is the issue of disciplinary inquiry. And this is it's brief. The issue, what we're trying to do is to seek clarification on how the Code of Regulations for teachers is aligned with this bill as it relates to matters on subsection 59. We think that consideration should be given to whether there'll be any compensation or reimbursement, lost wages for persons who may have who have been brought to this disciplinary inquiry and have been proven innocent. And we think that the bill should state that such persons found innocent, having been subjected to this inquiry, should be refunded. And the final area that we want to address is the Appeal Tribunal. And there are 3 issues here that I would want to address. These relate to 2 of which are highlighted in the 5th schedule, pages 75 to 76, and the other one on section 71, on page 53. So that's section 71 on page 53, and the 5th schedule, pages 75 to 76. Section 71, page 53, says that the provision states that on hearing an appeal under this part, the tribunal shall give its decision in writing within 28 days, or such longer period as the tribunal may reasonably require. The concern is that a provision is effectively made for the tribunal to take as long as it may determine it needs to render a decision by including the statement or such longer period as the tribunal may reasonably require. The net effect of this is that a person whose professional future or reputation hangs in the balance must wait, or may have to wait, for an indeterminate period of time to know their fate. Simply put, we think that this is not fair. The second issue relates to section 1, subsection 2 of the 5th schedule, which states that the validity of the proceedings of the tribunal shall not be affected by any defect in the appointment of a member. This exception was considered a prescription for abuse and builds in a permissible departure from due process. We suggest that good legislative practice suggests that prescribed procedures be observed. And the third issue is in the final paragraph, paragraph 12 on page 77. And this states that the office of the chairman of the tribunal or member of the tribunal shall not be a public office for the purposes of Chapter 5 of the Constitution of Jamaica. This we interpreted to mean that the actions of the chairperson and by extension the council would not be subjected to judicial review. And as such, a teacher who wishes to contest a decision of the council could not take the matter to court for judicial review. This, in effect, makes the council a law unto itself, and we would like to raise this as a red flag on such possibility. The recommendation, therefore, is that reasonable time limits for review should be set to ensure accountability, and that the JTC should be a public office to allow for judicial review if desired. That's the end of our submission, except that I just want a few closing comments. That there is need for clarification of paraprofessional on page 11. I think that could easily be included in the definitions. And the final point is that as we reviewed the bill in the school and thought about all that it is required, we think that it could be perceived that there may be a few overlaps between the University Council of Jamaica, which sets standards for programs, and Jamaica Teaching Council, who are responsible for professional standards. The bill explains that one role of the JTC is to promote awareness among the teaching profession and the public, and that's found on page 15 of the bill. And I also know that at this time, the Ministry of Education is spearheading the development of the higher education policy, which will have implications for JTech, UCJ, and JTC. It is a good time, therefore, and we recommend that as we consider all of these developments, that there is careful collaboration so that any source of potential confusion arising from any perceived or actual overlap among these entities can be addressed at this time, and that these professional standards are clearly articulated with those of the program standards from the UCJ, so that there is no room for ambiguity or misunderstanding. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We'll move into questions and answers or clarification. And I note, member, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Excellent presentation, Dr. Rainford. I appreciate that you not only raised concerns, but provided recommendations. As a product of the School of Education, I expected no less. I don't have questions, just a few comments. Firstly, that I share quite a number of the concerns that you have, and I agree with some of your recommendations. What particularly struck me and what I want to place on record that I fully support under the section Disciplinary Inquiry, I do take note that there's no clear mention regarding compensation or reimbursement for loss of wages if a teacher is proven to be innocent after an inquiry. So I do agree with the recommendation that the bill should state clearly that persons who are found innocent, that there is some form of reimbursement or compensation. Thank you.
Go ahead, member.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. There are two areas that I would want to get further clarification on. The first is in relation to the composition of the board. Now, in your presentation, you mentioned that there are 22 members, but when I did my tally, I found 23, so there's actually an odd number currently. And I wanted to know at section 1D that speaks to the 6 registered teachers, do you only accept the 5 teachers that are practicing teachers? Because it says that 6 registered teachers should be nominated, yes, but 5 should be licensed to practice. So are you accepting only the 5 as teachers?
Correct.
So maybe what we should do then is propose that all 6 are licensed to practice, and then you would have that extra 1.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Going also to, there's a point you made about persons who would provide voluntary service, but there is clause 4 that speaks to the application of the act. Clause 4.2 specifically states that this act does not apply to a person who teaches on an ad hoc voluntary basis without pay, reward, or consideration. Is it that there is something further that you would want to see to cover those persons, or do you think this is sufficient as it is?
No, we appreciate that the Act does make that stipulation. The issue here is that of instructors. And instructors, at this point, we are not quite sure who would fit that bill. We think it's very important. They have laid out the criteria. And right now we have many persons who are teaching in the system who are not trained. They are pre-trained teachers, and they're doing, many of them, an excellent job. And I think that's the reason why the term instructors is used in this bill, because there's a recognition that these persons serve a very important role. The point about the sort of informal approach that I raised as it relates to the young man is just that this is a real issue, and you do have in many institutions or many cases, you will have that sort of informal activity. And I think what needs to be clear perhaps in what is that called? The way in which you sensitize people is to make it clear that such persons would not be subject to any sort of penalty. You know, that is very important.
I can appreciate that because as MPs, we sometimes engage persons to do, for example, CXC recap.
Yes.
That are not necessarily trained teachers. So
Right.
I do appreciate that point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Member Morgan?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Rainford, I noted with interest, and thank you for your presentation. I thought it was well thought out. It gave some very good recommendations that I think could improve the bill. But I wanted to focus on two areas that you highlighted. One, as it relates to the composition of the board generally, and you raised a query as to the number of teachers that are on the board. So in my looking at the board, it says 6 registered teachers, 5 of whom shall be licensed to practice. And it takes some from a recognized entity that represents a majority of teachers. It also says at the back, a teacher who is registered and licensed and recognized for outstanding performance in education. So we're gone up a couple there. It's the same?
Just to provide some clarity. So when I did the calculation, I think if it is that we allow all 6 registered teachers to be licensed to practice, that would put the number to 12, and then that would be okay because that would be the majority.
So the question I ask is why, in your mind? So there are many players in the education sector.
Yes.
You have parents, you have non-teaching staff who are impacted by the work of teachers. You have the over 600,000 students. You have the taxpayers who fund institutions, who maintain the whole ecosystem. Why should teachers, in your mind, be the majority in this entity if it is that we're seeking to have broad stakeholder involvement in the entity to ensure accountability and probity? If I was going to be pessimistic, can I trust the majority of teachers to look out for the best interest of students and the education system? Yes,
because that's what professionals do. And it's very important for us to understand that this is about a professional organization that, as in other organizations, should be really self-monitoring. And I think that's part of what we need to appreciate, that what happens in the classroom, what happens at the level of the school, a lot of persons tend to think that because I went to school I know what's happening and I understand the issues related to teaching and learning. And that's a part of what has dogged the teaching profession for so many years. Then we suggest that anybody can teach. It's not the case. But outside of that, teachers have that knowledge of teaching and their craft, their experiences. And I think if we are going to trust the system, then we should trust the teachers to do what they can do.
I totally agree with you. And the reason why I asked the question is I was listening to an interview with the head of the dean of the teachers' colleges.
Okay.
And the question was raised, because I taught for a while myself, and the question was raised as it relates to the approach of various teacher representative entities. Mm-hmm. And there's a large group of Jamaicans who have become very concerned about the approach. So one of the things I noticed when I was junior minister in education is that in many cases when I spoke to some entities, they will say to you that we are not here representing anybody else but teachers. Our interest is teachers. And then in consulting before I came here, one of the concerns parents and some people in my constituency were saying, but we are the biggest stakeholders in the education system. We are the ones who send our children to school from 7 a.m. in many cases. The teachers are fit persons based on the Child Care and Protection Act, which means that they have a higher duty of care. So it cannot be that the teachers dominate this framework when we are the ones who are going to be either the beneficiaries or the victims of whatever actions take place. And that's something that I wanted to hear your views on.
Well, you see, it might well be that there should be other organizations that will perhaps carry out this sort of, and I use the word watchdog loosely, role of teachers. But this bill says that this bill is to promote teaching as a profession, to contribute to improving the quality of teaching and learning in Jamaica by regulating the entry, standing of members of the teaching profession to establish and maintain, etc., etc. This is about the professional development and advancement of teachers. And I think that therefore, you know, it's important for us to see that as an important part, because one of the things that other groups have mentioned, and even some of my colleagues have raised, is that there's a way in which sometimes the bill does come across as punitive. And the fastest way to reduce the impact of this very important bill is to see that as the primary function.
Thank you. Last question. You raised, and thank you very much for that, I thought it was a good point. You raised the point regarding the University of the West Indies, and you think that the University of the West Indies should get 2 representatives on the entity. Why shouldn't UCC have a representative, or those other universities? Or is it, so there are many universities in Jamaica. Why is it that the University of the West Indies, out of all our universities, should have more representatives than anyone else?
University of the West Indies is unique in terms of its role in teacher education in this country from the perspective of a university. The School of Education has had a very long standing in terms of its role in this country, in terms of policy and practice in education. Now, I can only speak for the University of the West Indies and the School of Education, and I believe that we have much to offer. Many of our teachers have been serving this country, and the quality of our output is significant. So the research component coming out of the education, the School of Education, and the university is significant. So I think that there is much that the UWI and the School of Education would have to offer in this regard, but I can only speak from that perspective.
My question finally wasn't to negate, as a past student of the University of the West Indies myself, the important role the university plays. But a part of legislation is also about equity.
Yes.
So while it is that your vested interest is the University of the West Indies, legislation has to also focus on what is in the best interest of the entire country.
And I respect that.
So I hope that you would contemplate in your mind whether or not the University of the West Indies should advocate as well for other universities to be a part of this important legislation.
Maybe that perhaps is what the legislators might choose to do. I represent SOE, yes.
All right, thank you, Member Morgan.
Yes.
We have 3 persons lined up. First, we have Member Rodriguez, and then Member Braham, and then Member Brownberg.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And Dr. Rainford, thank you for the presentation. It was quite thorough. I have 2 questions. Well, first, before I ask the 2 questions, thank you for making that point on page 7 with the definition of teachers, because you're right, it doesn't include early childhood teachers, because the majority would not fit into this criteria. So that's some work the committee and the ministry will have to do on that. However, you stated in your presentation that if the bill applies to teacher educators, it should not. And I listened intensely because I'm not sure from what you said, I got a real reason. The reason I heard from you was a matter of qualifications. And I wasn't clear in my mind why not. Because if you're teaching teachers to become excellent teachers, I think you should be governed by the same rules, unless there's something specific that I missed from what you said. Secondly, you mentioned that the regulations for instructors, teacher educators, should come after the regulations were sorted for our other teachers. Why? Why not do the same? Why not do both at the same time?
Okay, well, they could really be done at the same time if there's going to be enough. So I'm going with the second question first. They could be done at the same time if there is enough, room, personnel to make those sort of, to carry out the task. But we think that teacher educators cannot be in the same category as teachers. And it's not just because of the qualification. It has to do with the responsibility and what they are being asked to do. They are developing teachers. So they are the ones responsible for the quality, in part, in fact, a significant part of the teachers that are in our system. And therefore, they can't be held to the same standards as teachers. Their standards must be higher. And therefore, while they may be aligned, because they must be aligned, there are many responsibilities of the teacher educator that the teachers do not have.
Are you saying then that the rules for teacher educators should be stronger?
Yes.
So it's not that you're saying you shouldn't have rules, it's
No,
that you're
no.
saying you should have stronger rules.
I'm not saying at all that they should not have, we shouldn't have standards for teacher educators. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, I'm saying we should.
But they should be stronger.
They should be different.
Stronger?
And they must, this is Marcia speaking, be stronger than what you have for teachers.
Okay, thanks
They
for
must
that
be held to
clarification.
higher levels of responsibility.
Okay. Point now fully understood,
Yeah.
because I didn't get that initially, so I'm happy for that clarification. And in terms of, so then now I understand why you're saying the regulations should be different as well. Because if we're saying that the teacher educators need something a bit stronger because they should be held to a higher standard, which I agree with you on that, then of course the regulations should be okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member. We'll move on now to Member Braham.
Dr. Rainford, thank you very much. I want to ask a few questions in relation to some of the sections that you pointed out. If we start with clause 4G, I think, at page 8. Well, I think you mentioned the teacher educators and it should not apply, etc. If you could give me an example of a higher standard that could be applicable to a teacher educator but would not be applicable to a teacher.
For example, teacher educators should be researching their practice in ways that will add to the knowledge of preparing teachers that teachers would not be required to do. So the level of research that they would be required to produce would be different.
I see. In relation to the definition of a teacher in the definition section, I thought you had pointed that out at page 7. Teacher means a person who, having been admitted to an educational training program, duly recognized in the country in which the person is qualified, has successfully completed a bachelor's degree in education or its equivalent or alternative, a first degree with a postgraduate diploma, etc., etc. Now, this is not exactly the question you asked, but since you touch around it, I wondered whether putting such a specific definition was not a recipe for trouble. Yes, most teachers who are qualified nowadays, they have a bachelor's and they have a diploma maybe and so forth. But does that take into account the possibility that somebody could be qualified to teach and because of one or both or something else is not taken care of here? Should we simply say that the teaching council should set the qualifications and leave them to develop it? Or should we, and that would allow for new things and new training and new qualifications, or should we put it here so that if we need to change it, we have to go back to Parliament to amend it and the years that take? Is that a concern? I have that concern, but I don't know if it is a worthy one.
I understand the challenges that in legislation might pose, and because of the narrowness, sometimes it might, as you have addressed. But internationally, there are standards for teachers, and I think the government of Jamaica has by policy stated that the entry requirement for teaching is a bachelor's degree. And I don't think that we can go beyond that. We can't go lower than that. That has to be the bar.
No, I'm not saying it is the law. Equivalent.
Well, it does say equivalent.
Well,
it does say, but what we're saying, what I was speaking about with respect to the early childhood teachers, is that for the most part, their training is not equivalent to a first degree.
I'm going to come to that. Mm-hmm. But just before I come to that, in terms of the qualification,
yes,
these qualifications, the people who teach technical and vocational subjects, mm-hmm. they also now get the same qualifications?
Well,
and would they be teacher if the qualifications is not exactly the same?
Yes. Let me just, how do you put this? So there are many persons who have done a content degree, let us say they have done a technical program, and they're still teacher trained because they have gone through teacher training in perhaps it's linked to their content degree. So it can be done alongside it, it can be done after. So the teacher preparation program is not just one route. A person could get a first degree and then become professionally certified after that. That relates to those who are described in that definition as having completed a degree and then doing a postgraduate diploma. Some persons, the way we have it in Jamaica, teachers' colleges will offer a diploma in teaching. Those persons are trained teachers, but they don't have a first degree. The colleges now, most of them are offering first degree, so they leave the college with the training and with their content at the level of the degree. You do have some persons who, I think the system calls them specialists, and they may not have teacher training, especially those in those technical areas, and they come into the system and they teach for some time. Now, those persons, I think, would fit the role of instructors based on this bill, because I think the idea is to become professionally trained. You know, it's like this. If you go to a doctor and you describe your symptoms, you expect the doctor to be able to help you and to help you get better. Teaching is like that. The students come to us. We are supposed to, by virtue of our training and preparation, be able to diagnose the learning challenges and to address them. In other words, we must intervene. That is what professional training helps us to do. And it might come naturally to some persons that they can do all of this, but they may not have the technical knowledge. Professional training provides that knowledge.
Okay. In terms of the organizations, let's say persons who have extra lesson classes and so on, there may be volunteer organizations, there could be churches, people who are offering maths and English and that type of thing. People come in the evenings and homework things and so forth. In your view, how would the bill affect that type of activity?
Shouldn't. The fact is that in many of these institutions, persons are trained.
No, they are not trained.
If they are not trained, then they would have
volunteers.
Okay, then they would have to be, I think, authorized as instructors. I think that is what the bill, as how the bill takes care of that group. So what it would mean is that those individuals would not have the time span. So I think they're only given 2 years before they have to renew their authorization to teach. But the bill does not say how long they can do this renewal. We are suggesting that there should be a cap, because we think that it is important that persons who teach our children should be professionally trained.
But isn't that a difficulty though? Because those persons are providing supplemental assistance. Mm-hmm. So the student, for whatever reason, I mean, this is an extra lesson country, from my experience now, and so on. And so a student who is unable to afford to go to one of the official extra lesson places, where you have all these trained teachers and so forth. But his church organizes something because you have an engineer in there, or somebody like that, who is or a lawyer who is available and is able to offer assistance. And the children do very well, maybe because whatever. Why would you want to eliminate those persons out of the system? And that sounds a little harsh, but it seems to me that they are under threat. Why would I bother to go and register and get myself? I don't want to be a teacher. I just want to help.
Well, you know, I don't think the bill as it is written eliminates those persons.
Eventually.
No, the bill doesn't do that eventually. I am suggesting that eventually it should, yes, because there is no cap. So that's our recommendation. There is no cap. So the bill doesn't do that now.
Yes.
The bill doesn't have any cap on how many times. It may cost the individual, because I guess they would have to pay for the reauthorization. Yes. But the bill doesn't do that. I am using my own professional bias and knowledge. Bias is not always bad.
That's a very important
You know,
word.
bias is not always bad.
Yes, yes.
But I'm using my knowledge and experience to suggest
Yes.
that many times, and with the greatest of respect, many times individuals help persons, and here it is, to pass examinations. That is not always the same as learning.
Yeah, but remember, Doc, they are supplementing. They are not running a school, you know. They are going to Wolmer's or whatever the school is, or KC, more importantly. But they are going to school in the normal course of things.
Yes.
So they're really supplemental people.
Yes.
And if they are supplemental, I think they really should be encouraged. But I'm not going to press you anymore on that. I've expressed my view, and I want to now touch on the early childhood persons.
Yes.
Now, would it not be possible or preferable then to have a separate transitional registration for them? Let us say the government, if it is the government's intention to cause all teachers in the public system or private, but you know, infant schools, everybody come up to that level, and they determine that it's going to take them 10 years to do that. We could create a system where the persons are provisionally registered, call them something, whatever the name you wish to call them, which would then allow them to teach and give them the 10 years or whatever to phase out the system. Something like that. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good suggestion, and I think that a phased approach is what will likely take place, but it has to be more than that. 10 years, Dr. McCallum is saying is too much, but here's a real situation. We have to provide funding. We must provide funding for those teachers to be trained, because what they earn cannot allow them to borrow money, to get training, and to pay back a loan. It cannot happen. So it is not in its current state. So yes, a phased approach is perhaps a pragmatic way to deal with the problem, and I would support that, but it has to be balanced, because that alone will not do it.
No, thank you. The professional appraisal, I think, and the evaluation. Professional appraisal, one of them is conducted by the employer, or the principal, or the teacher, and so on. Are they necessarily the same?
We don't think it is, that they are the same. And that is what we need to be clear about.
So the one that is done by the principal would not necessarily replace the one. The principal, as I understand it, would say, Braham, you are a terrible teacher.
Yes.
We need to get you out of the system. That's what she would say.
Yes.
But then I go off to another school and I get a job there as well. Shouldn't there not be a system? I mean, and I'm now speaking from my experience now as a former school board chairman.
Hope you weren't fired.
Yes, it was excellent. I like it. But should not there be a system where a person's quality?
Yes.
So I'm teaching Latin, so nobody teaches Latin, so I can use that. And my content knowledge of Latin, I have a degree in Latin, you know, but for whatever reason, for some reason, I don't remember nothing about Latin. But I'm teaching Latin. I get fired because I'm incompetent. But then I move on to somewhere else. What if the council I could report it to the council, and the council said, no, Graham, you need to go and go over your degree. You don't know nothing.
No, that is fine, you know.
So you don't have a problem with that?
No, we're in support of that, you know.
Oh.
The only challenge that we have here is this.
Yes.
We are not clear on what this professional appraisal means. We are not at all suggesting that it shouldn't happen. We may even be suggesting that it may not be the responsibility of the council, but we're not quite sure what it really is. So if it is something, think about this, just think about it. If this is something that is happening every year for every teacher, let's put it at even every 3 years for every teacher by the council.
Yes.
That's a...
No, but it could be done another way.
Yes.
It would be done when necessary.
Well, that's my point.
So
but
that...
the bill doesn't say that.
No, but it is, you give the discretion to the council
Yes.
to determine when it is necessary. So you happen to be my principal.
Yes.
Which, well, anyhow, you happen to be my principal, and you know that I have a difficulty. Mm-hmm. So when my time comes for registration, you may send a note to the council, look carefully at Graham. And Graham now might have to demonstrate that he really does have the capacity.
Which is good. But all we're saying is that it should be made clear. That's all.
Very well.
It should just be clear.
All right.
I tend to agree with that, Member Graham. But I think that maybe an insertion of, it's just to add to that point, Madam Chair, an insertion of a definition of the appraisal needs to be in the interpretation section of the bill so that we have clarity, because I too had an issue as to what it meant.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it sounds a little tedious, but I do have one or two more. With your leave.
Could you allow Member Burke and then come back to you?
You wish me to stop at this point?
No, we'll come back.
Very well.
Member Burke?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Rainford, let me add my word of thanks for the presentation that you have made and the points that you have raised, and in particular the solutions that you have placed on the table. You have already answered one of the questions I had in terms of teacher education. Teacher educator, so that's okay. I wanted to go back though to the early childhood practitioners, because I note that I don't know if I missed it, but I didn't get a proposal from you in terms of how we should treat that transition.
Okay.
In terms of where we are now. And I happen to know that there are many individuals who have been trained, for example, by Heart NTA, as it was then, and that even those qualifications don't squarely match anywhere. In fact, many of them find it difficult to even matriculate into a teacher training institution. So there are some real problems that I think we need to address. And from your perspective in the field, I'd love to hear a proposal as to how that could be covered.
Thanks, Member. It really is a very difficult problem, as you have identified. The government infant schools do not have that problem because the teachers there are trained. So what we have is a range of private institutions primarily, where you have a number of persons who are teaching our children at a very, very early age, and they are not trained. So a part of it is because, I think part of what has led to this is because for so many years the government has not really taken responsibility for that sector.
Absolutely.
So that is something that I think has to happen, and that is by policy, that has to be done. But we recognize that it's going to take quite a lot of money to do this. And perhaps the member's suggestion of a timely, sort of rolling out of that process must take place. That's one possibility. But the issue is what happens to them now? I do not recommend that we expand the definition of teachers to include persons who are trained at the vocational level. I don't think that would be the right way to go, but I believe that some concession should be made to allow these persons to continue to teach, and we make every effort to provide the funds to bring them up to speed. But, the point that you have also made is true, that in many instances, many of them may not matriculate to complete their program. Now, I don't know how we're going to honestly don't have a solution for that, except to say that if we were really, really, really first world, then we would perhaps continue to retain these persons as teaching assistants and provide enough support, trained teachers in the system. I mean, that's one way, but we are not, unfortunately. But that certainly is going to have significant impact on a lot of many women, put it that way. And for that, I am really concerned.
Okay. Thanks for that. I wanted also just to say that in respect of the appraisals, I mean, it was mentioned before that obviously is an area that we're going to have to look at to make sure that there's no overlap. But I particularly like the proposal you made about ensuring that the council is not engaged in developing professional development activities, but that they should leave that to another institution. Yes. I thought that was a point well made with that. I think, was that it? In terms of the Appeal Tribunal, where you said that the clause in terms of the office of the chair, that this was interpreted to mean that the actions of the chairperson and by extension the council would not be subject to judicial review. No, that's not it. There was a time period that you thought wasn't there, but you didn't suggest what would be a reasonable time. I think that's what it was.
Yes, I think it said 28 days.
And then they went
and
on
then went on to say it could be anything. No, because it says so. It leaves it for me to throw it out the window. It says that in writing within 28 days or such longer period as a tribunal may reasonably require.
Right.
And what may be reasonable for one person may not be, especially if you're on the other end. So 28 days is what? 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Maybe one could say 6 weeks.
Okay. Okay. So you would suggest a 6 week window
yeah.
as being reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, and thank you for that.
All right. Member Rodriguez, and then we circle back to Member Graham.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a question that I didn't ask that I think needed to be asked. I don't know if you have a copy of the bill there with you.
Yes.
On page 41. So we're looking at section 45(4).
Yes.
Which speaks to the renewal of license or authorization to teach. Mm-hmm. So I'll just give you a few seconds to read that section and ask, what are your thoughts on that section?
Yes, because I didn't give the number of years, but the persons are licensed to teach for 3 years. Mm-hmm. Now, sorry, they should be continuously teaching for 3 years. Yeah, that's it. That's the section that you're referring to.
Yes.
So they should be continuously teaching for 3 years.
In order to be able to renew the license. So let us say, for example, you win the lotto.
Yes.
And you decide that you're going to go travel for 3 years, 4 years.
Yes.
You would then not be able to renew your license because you have not taught for 3 years. What, in your professional opinion, what are your thoughts on this?
We didn't mention it in our submission, but I don't think that is reasonable. I don't think it is fair. Because, you're a trained teacher. You understand teaching and learning. Mm-hmm. You have not been teaching for some time for many reasons. Why would that be inserted there? The question is, what value does it serve?
What value does what serve? Because,
for example, 3 years of continuous teaching in order for it to be for the relicensing to take place.
So let us say I'm a teacher and I haven't taught for 10 years. Are you saying that person then should be allowed to just come back to renew their license without having to do anything?
No, but the continuous professional development requirements takes care of that. It takes care of it because you would be you couldn't get your relicensing if you have not been doing your professional development.
So you're saying if the professional development is being done but you're not in the classroom, you should be fine?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, member. We'll move on to Member Braham, then Morgan, then Green.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. We are coming to the area of conflict of interest. I think you said, and that conflict of interest is generated, as I understand it, simply because the council will be offering professional development courses.
Yes, they'll be developing them. They'll be developing them, they'll be approving them, and they'll be determining the framework.
So what's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is that they put themselves in a position to select their professional development courses.
They are professionals. They're not going to be that mean-spirited.
But then they're also giving oversight.
Yes.
Something is not right there. Especially in a context where there are many other possibilities for developing.
But of course, you mentioned other agencies, other groups who do exactly that. They organize their own program, just in case anybody don't do it. They authorize other people who apply, and they have a happy competition. But I'm not asking you to answer that.
No, because I have stated my case.
I'm just telling you that. Now, the question of persons found innocent.
Yes.
For them to be compensated, I find that interesting because, of course, who would do the compensating? The government? The person who made the complaint?
The person who made the complaint? No, they are the ones who should be compensated.
No.
Sorry.
Somebody could complain against Briam, the teacher.
Okay.
And Briam goes before a disciplinary hearing, or Briam, something the council has to do in relation to Briam, and Briam gets acquitted or exonerated. So Dr. Rainford is the one who brought the complaint against me.
Yes.
Should you pay me?
I'm not sure who would make that payment in that case.
Not Dr. Rainford.
What I think, though, I guess that could be worked out. I didn't see it like that in terms of somebody bringing a complaint against a teacher and then what would happen there. But I think it is important that persons who have been found innocent, they shouldn't be required to pay that penalty. They shouldn't lose. They shouldn't lose having gone through. I mean, remember, these things can take a long time, Well, we have just said 6 weeks. But I mean, this thing could take some time.
Yes, I agree, it can take some time.
Yeah.
But as a part of the discipline, you wouldn't want a situation for persons not to be brought before the committee or the council because persons are concerned of the costs that is involved. We're going to become a sort of check on the administrative function. And then if you say that the government must compensate everybody who wins, then some lawyers would like that benefit as well. But you don't need to answer that, though. There are two more questions, Chairman. I know you're worried about the question I'm answering, so I'm going to end by coming to the next question, is the defect of appointment. When it says that person where the appointment is defective. So, for example, Briam again is appointed to a committee or whatever, and for some reason the Gazette my appointment was not issued in the Gazette. That's a defect of appointment.
Yes.
And you could in fact end up having to do everything all over simply because of the Gazette not published.
The Gazette should be published with your appointment.
Yes.
So the systems should work. The system should work.
But it is because it understands the nature of the system that we have and the possibility that something could happen, and Briam the scoundrel could go free based on that defect. That
But
would not be proper.
the system shouldn't allow for that. The system should be fixed.
Okay, very well. All right. I think that is enough for me.
Thank you,
very
sir.
much.
Okay, thank you, Member. We do have Member Morgan, then Member Green, and then Member Brown, Lambert Brown.
Just a point. You raised it, and I was a bit confused by the point, so I would love your clarity. You said that the council would not be subjected to judicial review?
That's our understanding. We could be wrong. Maybe you could help us to understand it.
Well, I'm not as learned as others among us. But I would suspect that as a statute that governs a body that is doing a public service, and there are many, I don't know if my attorney's friends over there would be able to guide us, because public bodies and public entities that carry out administrative action based on the Constitution and also many statutes, I think it's Henry versus R was one of them.
But it actually stipulates that it's not a public office.
By definition, it would be, though. Can I be assisted?
Chairman, the question of public office, as well, I think, Chairman, one of the Attorney General's persons should address this question.
Dawn, would you be able to address that, or Mr. Foreman, or Ms. Wilkins?
Yes,
Mr. Foreman, go ahead.
no, that provision would not operate to oust the jurisdiction of the courts. Sorry, the provision would not operate to oust or displace judicial review.
Okay.
As has been pointed out, the entity would be a public body, and all public bodies are subject to the judicial review, subject to some very minor exceptions that don't apply.
Dr. Rainford was concerned about the reference that they are not public officers, and that's a slightly different creature.
Okay.
So if you could just explain that as well.
Yeah, the Constitution has provisions in place that describe and define public officers and public officials. The purpose of that provision is to make clear that that general operation doesn't apply in relation to the chairman of the officers to whom the section applies. So it excludes them from being categorized in the same way that I am categorized as a civil servant, but it doesn't prevent them from their actions from being challenged.
Okay. Yes. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you.
Member Green?
Yes, Chair, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Rainford. I did watch the presentation as I made my way here. I didn't hear all of the questions, though, so if I'm asking a question that preceded me, I apologize. I do have a couple, but probably I should pick up on the last point about the public office. Let me start where I have the notation. So I have heard the discussions in relation to professional appraisal and the need for some form of definition, right? I will tell you, sometimes I do wonder how many of these definitions you include in the overarching act, because then when you sometimes create this limiting factor, to change it oftentimes becomes a very difficult task. And sometimes some of these things are better fitted out in regulations that can be changed easier. I did worry about the section that said leave the appraisal to solely to school administrators, because I wondered if that isn't the present reality, and if that present reality is really giving us what we're trying to achieve to ensure that we have the quality that we need. But I think, sir, it was dealt with earlier. So I just make those as comments. Again, I
Sorry,
think...
Member Green, could I just say that the current reality is that there's no requirement for professional development? It's
Professional appraisal.
Or appraisal. I know that there is an appraisal system that has been put in recently, but it's
that's why I would go as far as to say I think the JTC has to have as part of its function this professional appraisal component. What I do here is that it should be defined, and I take that point to a degree because I'm not sure if it should be defined in the Principal Act, right? And again, I'm not, any sort of professional appraisal does already have a sort of definition that would be ascribed to the words that are used. So I'm not sure if we need to go further. But I take the point. But what I'm very clear on is that I think the JTC has to have that as one of its roles, professional appraisal, because I believe the appraisal system we have now, or the lack thereof, as you're saying, Minister, it has a challenge. So that is one. That is one. I think my other point has been dealt with in relation to the CPD, so I'll just make it as a comment that, you know, again, I believe there would be precedents for the JTC to be involved in developing these programs. But there also has to be a robust system that is transparent, that that people can apply for their programs to be registered, and that there's no hindering to that. So I think that is what would have to be put in place early out in the organization. All right, a couple questions that I have. As the board, the board of the council is comprised, isn't already as a grouping, don't teachers make the majority of the board as a grouping? I see us trying to use the numbers to say that teachers are not in the majority, but I believe in terms of as a representative entity, teachers would have the majority by far of the, you understand what I'm asking?
I
because
understand.
You already have 6 teachers, and in the other sections, it goes up to about 10 people who definitely are teachers. So they already have the majority of the membership of the board, even if it doesn't appear to be a straight numbers majority. But it is, as a grouping, by far, they have over a third of the board or more.
Yes, member, we had looked at it, and another member had sort of guided the conversation and pointed to how we could fix that. So I think I'm in agreement with what you're saying.
Okay. And I think the point about the university, I did wonder, what percentage of the teaching cohort, and you may not be able to answer it, would the School of Education be directly involved in the training thereof? Because, you know, when I saw the recommendation, I thought that maybe there was a correlation between how many people the university trained as to why they would believe that there should be a greater increase in numbers on the council.
In terms of the undergraduate, we have both graduate and undergraduate programs, and whereas we have our undergraduate program over the years, our numbers have dwindled as it would have, as is the case, I think, for most of our teachers' colleges. Our graduate program is a very strong program, and we produce by far most of the graduate teachers in the system.
Okay. All right, 2 more quick things. Again, the disciplinary inquiry, and unless I missed it, but upon the commencement of the disciplinary inquiry, I'm not sure what harm befalls the teacher that would require, if the teacher is found innocent, for there to be compensation. So maybe I missed that. And maybe
That's only in cases where the teacher might have lost income? Yeah.
Yeah, but if they're put under interdiction and they're found innocent, then automatically they're reimbursed. As in, that is already standard practice and law. I'm saying I'm not sure we would need to put another layer in this bill for that. And if they're not interdicted and they're just a disciplinary inquiry, then, if they're found innocent, they're found innocent. I think, part of the discussion that I think, Minister, we have to have, this is not only about filtering out where there may be bad teachers, but also filtering out where there may be allegations that are made that cannot be substantiated about good teachers. And I think it's one of the points that we have to make. So, the final thing, in relation to the validity of the proceedings, I heard the point, but I'm not sure I agree with. All right, let me put it a different way. If somebody goes through these proceedings and the proceedings have come to an end, and let us say the tribunal has ruled against them, or let us say the tribunal has ruled for them, what I think this clause is trying to ensure is that if, for example, the minister did not sign an appointment letter, but the person was sitting as a part of the tribunal, that the ruling of the tribunal would not be completely put aside because of that lack in appointment procedure. So I think we have to be clear because, again, if we make it that, and it's very specific in relation to the appointment, a defect in appointment, because, again, if we were to go through the process and then somebody is found, again, based on inquiry, that they have committed a wrong and they're separated from the system, just because a letter was not signed in the appointment process, you would not want to have to start over the process. And the same on the other side. Somebody is found innocent, and then you realize that something would have gone wrong in the appointment, which is largely a process dealt with by the minister and at the technical level. So I think what this section is really trying to ensure is that once the defect does not go to the process of the decision making, then the decision making should be upheld. Once the defect goes to something like the appointment. So, I just wanted to raise that. That's my interpretation of it. So I don't think it would really be a prescription for abuse, especially because it deals directly with the defects in appointment, as opposed to a procedural defect that was, not taken into account. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Member Green. We'll move on to Member Lambert-Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Rainford and Dr. McCollum, we thank you for your presentation. I, like my colleagues, disagree on the issue of the public servant. It's a provision that is put in many legislation, and in my little time in the chamber, I've seen that in many things. Where good faith accompanies the procedural error, it's going to be protected. However, if bad faith can be proven, then certainly I think your point would be taken and it would be subject to review. Everybody can be lawyer. No, not everybody can be lawyer, but everybody can explain the law. Everybody can explain the law. That is why I'm glad that only if I pretend to be, that you can bring me up. That raises the question of the supplementary tutoring, which my friend just raised. And you quite properly raised the case of that young boy in St. Anna. I believe, remember, Brown, you visited with him, Brown Burke, you visited with him. Now, the law kind of says if you're not collecting pay, then you can do that. But there's a submission before us also from a person who did tutoring during the pandemic and obviously got paid, and I suspect the pre-university activities of former Guild President Green students on the campus where they are, I believe, paid. Is there room for people like that in the system who really, as Senator Abraham says, supplement the process? Should they be allowed in the system given the state of education at this point?
I really believe that they do have a role, and I have said that a number of such persons do exist. In fact, a number of teachers start out without teacher training. I'm one of them. So the issue is not that those persons should not participate, because without them, I don't think we would have got to where we are now. The key thing is that we recognize that if we're talking about teaching and teacher professional development and professionalization, professionalizing the profession, then part of that is training. And so you can't get around that. If you have a profession, then there must be some sort of training, because the expectation is that there is this body of knowledge that these persons have, and that's the reason why they're professionals. So whereas we recognize that there is a need for such persons to support the system, I think what we're trying, I think the issue that you're raising is, should this lead to them being punished, perhaps in some way, because of doing a good thing? And I say no. But I think the bill provides for that, because as I have said, they can, if this is something that they're doing ongoing, they can be authorized as instructors. So all they need to do is to take that route, because the bill does provide for it.
And the bill without pay. But
no, I think no, instructors are paid. Instructors can be paid.
No,
should be.
Not just instructors. I'm talking about these tutors.
But they would have to apply to be authorized to serve as instructors. That's the point I'm making.
I see. So you then describe
it becomes formalized, yes.
Right.
Yes, and I support it.
And the bill, therefore, should address this issue much more fully
yes.
than it does now.
Yes.
The composition of the teaching council, is it that you have a view that there should just be a mere majority, or given the fact that this is to monitor teachers, it should reflect a majority, a significant majority, as in the GLC, the nursing council, and the medical council, and not just an arithmetic thing is 12 out of 23 or 13 out of 25, but it should be substantial?
The fact is that the council should have a significant number of teachers. But if you remember where I started, the teaching is a little different because the children are involved. And the state is responsible for the nation's children. So the state must have some say as well. So I respect that and I appreciate that. And so while I understand the need for a greater presence in terms of teachers on the council, I also have to balance that with the many different stakeholders that are in fact involved in teaching. So teaching is really not quite like all necessarily of the others because of how it is administered. And I think that's a part of the challenge that we face.
Wouldn't that be not appreciating the fact that lawyers, so few of them, does impact everybody? Because their decisions, their submissions, does affect the entire society. But you may not have to answer that. Right? There's so many lawyers in the room that will get you in trouble. You point out the role of the state in education.
Mm-hmm.
Are you of the view that to ideally impact the outcome we want in education, that the state has to do much, much more, including this bill, to make sure that people are qualified as teachers?
Well, I'm aware that the state does quite a lot in terms of preparing teachers and, funding in great part many of the institutions that serve as teacher education institutions. And yes, much more can be done. And I don't think I'm in a position to say how much more can be done, but I can say this, that at the early childhood level, as we have spoken, there is a lot that needs to be done there, and that's the foundation, that's the bedrock. And until that is fixed, no matter what happens at the other levels, we're not going to get the fruit that we're trying to reap. So yes, if I had my wish list, more would be spent on education. More would be spent on early childhood, more on primary. The conditions, the schools, the ways in which teachers have to function in very uncomfortable situations. I went to a school the other day to observe a teacher, and I sat in an air-conditioned lab. I didn't even know when time was passing. I have been to other schools, and I sit as close to the door as I can, especially during the summertime. So yeah, there's a whole range of issues that must be addressed, but it's not for me to say where the funds should come from.
Would it be your view, and I mean your collective, that this bill does not address the needs of the early childhood education sector sufficiently, recognizing the reality that that's where most of the untrained teachers are, and that's where you really need to be professional-izing?
That's correct. That's my view.
And so we should put a priority as we move this bill on that sector.
Yes.
Final-ish question. Have you been privy to the CARICOM model bill?
Yes.
Is that a bill you believe could help this committee in developing the piece of legislation?
Yes, and I think perhaps you could look at it. Certainly I looked at the teacher education component because I wanted to see what they had to say. I like how it's laid out. It's very, very simple. It's easy to follow, and it captures, I think, quite a lot without being too heavy in terms of how it's stated. So I would recommend that you have a look at it.
And is it as punitive as
No,
this
it's
one
no,
now?
it's not. It's not.
It is not. Madam Chair, can I recommend that the committee be provided with a copy of the CARICOM model legislation so that
It's the standards, it's the standards for teacher professional development for teachers and for teacher educators.
whatever is equivalent to what I'm asking of the chair, formally moving that it be provided to us.
Make a note of it, member.
All right. Thank you very much, and all the best.
We have, one second, we have member Brownberg again, and then member Cuthbert.
I'm good. The question that I wanted to be answered was really around the notion of the public body, and that. So that's been answered, so I'm good.
Okay. Member Cuthbert.
Thank you. Very good presentation, by the way, and I agree with most of what you mentioned. What I wanted to find out, though, just some clarification on registers and role of instructors. You mentioned about the qualification of the instructors. In the last part, you mentioned that there should be also a stipulation on the maximum number of years that an instructor can serve in that capacity. Are you saying that after a number of years they should, be more qualified? What exactly are you saying about that particular section?
All right, so I'm a teacher educator, and the reason for that is because I think that there is a need to train teachers. So we know that teachers develop their knowledge through practice as well as through formal training, because there is a sense in which you're teaching and you understand some things and you know it works. So next year you do the same thing. So that's practice-based knowledge. And you may not even have the correct theoretical frame to put that on. But you know that it works. And a lot of instructors find themselves in that position. But for you to really hone your practice and to be able to share and to be able to explain why you do what you do need formal knowledge. And so my point is that instructors should be authorized to teach as they are, and they should renew this authorization as is required. But I think after a time, they should become trained. They should get that formal professional training, because that is what teaching is about. It's not just about being able to teach, but it does require, yes, it requires professional training. And so if there is a cap, right, then it might incentivize those persons to go get trained, if I really love it so much.
Right. And is there a specific number of years that you would say, when you say after what, after a time, that they should?
Yes.
What would that number be?
I thought that after the third time, you should get trained. So 6 years of your life you've committed to this thing. I think you should. And it's not that hard. It's usually a year postgraduate. And it really can be done. And the thing about it, is that when we don't see this as necessary, it says something about how we think about teaching.
Thank you, Member Cuthberg. I totally agree. We're used to thinking that anybody can teach. Yeah. And, if you can't find a job elsewhere, go teach. And we need to raise that level of professionalism and let people know that not everybody can teach, right? Mm-hmm. You have to jump over certain hurdles to get into the industry. And once you're there, you're required to continually upgrade your skills, and you have to have a certain character about you, because you're teaching values as well. Yes. Yeah. Member Gail?
Thank you.
I'm sorry I missed your presentation. This one can work for me. I am happy where you would have referenced clause 7 in terms of the appraisal and how appraisal ought to be treated, because I don't believe, I share your view and sentiment, that I don't believe those who do not interface with employees should be the ones conducting the appraisal. So I share that view. It was a view that was expressed by the group last week, so there is some consistency in approach. My question to you, however, is that, appraisals can go either way. An employee can be in agreement with the appraisal, or there can be disagreement with the appraisal. Now, in the context of those who you are proposing as the oversight for the appraisal, let's say there's a disagreement. Could it be that the JTC could be an appellate body in terms of that other review in the case of there's a disagreement by the teacher? I would just want you to consider that.
Yeah, I see no problem there.
Okay.
I see no problem there.
The next area, and I accept the area where you said that a teacher would have been out there for this extended period and would have been acquitted of the charges for not to suffer. So, like a representative of the work, I share that view. The section 71.1, where you made reference to the time frame of the tribunal, it speaks to
28 days.
Within 28 days in the first instance. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that a tribunal, given the context of the issue, given the context of the case, may require some more time. And I accept the fact where you have indicated that it can be this inordinate time frame. Are you suggesting to us that there should be a defined period outside of these 28 days?
Yeah.
And if that is so, what could be that proposed defined period? In order to hold the tribunal to some level of accountability and not have the teacher out there.
I did suggest it should be 6 weeks.
6 weeks?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Gale. I, too, have a question, and it goes back to the fact that you're saying this bill should not apply to teacher educators, and because their standards are higher. If we were to describe those higher standards and include them in this bill, would that be okay?
So the question is, if the JTC bill should include, so remember, the bill is about regulation of the teaching profession, and it relates to the fact that the JTC is going to be that regulatory body. Now, what is here suggests that teacher educators would be treated in the same way as a teacher. So your question is, if you should change that and instead put, let's say, another series of clauses about teacher educators, if that would work, then my answer is yes.
So is it not possible that the teaching council could be given the power to deal with teacher educators and empowered to make the regulations separately? Then it can be debated and the higher standards and so on. I'm a little skeptical about the higher standard myself, because I think the minimum should apply to everybody. But that's just beside the point. But it may be easier simply to give them the power and allow them to develop it and issue their regulations later when they consult with everybody and treat it that way. Sure, yes.
But, Minister, if I might just add to the point that I was making, there is JTEC, there is UCJ. So I think this is the essence of what I said at the end, that there are Jamaica tertiary education. So all of these entities exist and reside and relate to the Ministry of Education in some way. And I think that's part of what needs to be addressed. And this is a great time to do it, because everybody's working on their different sections. So what really needs to happen is that instead of just treating this as an entity in and of itself, it should be done simultaneously to look at what is happening with JTEC, the higher ed policy, UCJ, because all of those are going to have an impact on the final outcome of teaching.
Yes, that looks like it. Any additional questions? Any closing remarks? Member Morgan?
And it is not really a question that is specific to any clause in the bill. It's a general question. You are head of the department, School of Education.
School of Education.
So you would have been around the ring for a while.
Now.
Yes, I have a vast understanding of the area and experience. My apologies. What concerns me, though, in listening to the conversations around this bill particularly, and around education in general, is that there seems to be an acknowledgement that the system is broken, but there seems to be a resistance among several stakeholders. It's like they're saying, don't fix me, fix somebody else first. So we're here trying to debate the Teaching Council bill, But then the suggestion is made, well, maybe you should look at early childhood education, which is a good point. But the question I want to ask is, in your estimation and your experience, and if you could help me out here, what should we do as a government? What would you consider your priority in transforming the system that you have participated in for such a long time, and I know you hold dear? I would love to hear your views on that.
I really think that early childhood requires urgent attention.
I know, it's a very discrete point, but I wanted a more expansive, because it cannot just be early childhood. We acknowledge, and it's universally accepted, that an investment in early childhood gives you a significant return on investment, but that's a very medium-term approach. We are in a crisis now.
Yes.
So based on your understanding, yes, we acknowledge early childhood. What do we need to do now to fix the system or to move it forward positively?
All right, so I really feel that this bill is an important bill, and that it is important because it positions the teaching profession at another level, and that teachers are now being recognized as professionals and will be held to higher standards. One of the key aspects of this bill is the need for continuous professional development of teachers. That is very important, and I think that's a very good step. It is a very good step, because teachers are not made by initial teacher training. It requires ongoing education. Now, that principle has to be sold to the wider population, and I think that this bill allows for that to take place in a way that will be embraced by everyone. The challenge that teachers have with the bill, is not the fact that there is need for professional development. It's because it does come across as a punitive bill in some respects, and I think that we need to listen and listen for that and hear that, because it's the experience, it's what they hear. And so we need to understand that that is a problem as it is laid out. So, remember, I'm not sure I have any other recommendation as to how to fix it, because it can't be fixed by looking at any one area. There are many areas that need to be addressed simultaneously. Some, I think, are more critical and urgent than others. My fear about early childhood education is that we just always feel that they are babies and they are young and they will grow. They don't grow to become better if the foundation is weak. And we have lived for many years. You talk about how long I've been around, I won't tell you. But we have lived for many years with that idea, and it hasn't changed. So the data suggests that what we think or what we know, we haven't acted on it. And so we can't expect anything to be different unless we make that push. And I don't know where the government going to get the money from, and I'm glad I don't have that responsibility. But it needs to be addressed, and it is past urgent. And I am not an early childhood educator.
I want to really thank you for that. I think it was very insightful, and I really appreciate it coming from someone with your experience with the best interests of the sector at heart. Thank you very much, Dr. Rainford.
Thank you.
Chair. Dr. Rainford, sorry, I just want to engage you for a minute on your observation about the punitive nature of the bill, other than the fine for someone whose license expires and you continue to teach. What else about the bill is punitive in your opinion?
Well, let me tell you something. You see, that in and of itself is what creates the pushback that you're getting. Now, I don't share the view of my colleagues that persons who have lost, they're not licensed, they should continue to teach. I don't share that view. I don't think that's what they were saying either. But I believe that they need to be fined The challenge that we have is, how much is that fine? I think that's the key. And because you shouldn't allow persons who are not licensed to teach. It flies in the face of what we're talking about. You should take responsibility. If you're a professional, you should get your training, you should do your thing, and you should get licensed. We could argue about who pays for the licensing. That's another point. If you're in the government service, who should pay for it? All of those issues, I think, perhaps could be addressed, because that's a part of the issue. And so maybe if consideration is given to that, there may be a little less pushback.
You
All
said
right,
something
you.
just now.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman. You said a way to mitigate the concern would be for, let's put it this way, as subsidizing or paying for the license. Wouldn't you contemplate that if you're professionalizing the system and people are professionals within the system, then as a part of their ownership of their professionalized pursuit, that they have to, so if you look at the teacher training sector, it is highly subsidized. Even teachers within the government service, continuing development is highly subsidized. It's not?
Well, it depends.
Right.
It depends.
So wouldn't it be a part of the partnership where persons own their development, maintaining the partnership with government in subsidizing and assisting in continuing development, but because you paid for your license is now a commodity that not only is applicable in Jamaica, but it can be applicable internationally. Mm-hmm. So are you suggesting that the government should now be subsidizing the training of teachers, subsidizing their continuing education, and also subsidizing them getting a license, which may invariably empower them to market themselves internationally to other jurisdictions? Do you contemplate that implication?
Well, the teachers will also have to pay for their continuing professional development. I don't know the extent to which the government will be able to or willing to subsidize all of that. But I think we also need to bear in mind and acknowledge that teachers are not the best paid civil servants, and that they really do find it difficult. It really is very hard, if you're a teacher and you have children and you're a single parent. It's not as easy as it is for some other professionals. So it's that reality that one has to balance. And I think this may have to be something that is done over time, but I really believe that consideration should be given to that, because they are still serving the nation's children. I think that's important.
Sure. I just want to come back to the point of the fine, because when I look at other professional bodies, for example, the Professional Engineers Registration Act, they have a similar fine there, and in fact, in terms of jail time, they could have up to 2 years, which tells me that they take that profession very seriously. Why wouldn't we, we're trying to take the teaching profession very seriously as well, and that it's indicated that, reflects in the fine that you would charge, someone would be charged if they are found teaching without a license. Why is there resistance to that?
I think that
without, if you're found teaching and you're not licensed, then that's when you are fined, right? It's not.
But the fact that you're teaching, and I'm referring now, let us say, to the public institutions. If you are teaching in a public institution, then the government of Jamaica ought to know that you're teaching. in a public institution and you're not licensed. So I think the system can work to weed that person out. And I'm not suggesting at all that there should not be a fine. And I'm not suggesting that, teachers should, they should be fined. What I'm saying is, how much should this be? And I don't know.
Remember, it doesn't happen unless you violate the law.
Yes, yes. And I don't think you should violate the law. But I'm just wondering, what is the penalty for violating the law?
That's it. From 500,000 and up to 6 months.
Yeah.
Member Brown?
Yeah, but...
Thank you, Chairman. The issue of the fines, we came to Parliament and we said not wearing masks could be a ticket. But we see what has been happening in places throughout the country, massive fines on poor people. What I'm understanding is that the teachers' remuneration is such that they ought not to be fined for a day, 2 days, or whatever period with an expired license still teaching. That's how I understand it, and it's a matter for the committee to discuss. But I just want to comment on the statement made earlier, the questions posed, the comments made by the former Minister of State in Education and current Minister of Information. And I hope sincerely that what you said was not reflective of government policy just now, because certainly it would be a set of policy that would be so anti-teachers. Teachers who are not now required to make a payment of fees and things. The comments made by
Madam Chair,
Madam
Chair, no, Madam Chair, no. Madam Chair, Madam Chair, on a point of order,
Oh, you didn't hear it? Well,
Madam Chair, on a point of order.
But I rest at that. I hope it doesn't reflect
Madam Chair, on a
policy.
point of order.
Yes, point of order.
It cannot be that as legislators, we here to gain knowledge to improve the bills that are before us, and members are seeking to cast aspersions, lower other members in the estimation of the public. I think it's offensive, and I think it's wrong. It is offensive, it is wrong, and I'm not going to sit here, Madam Chair, and allow the member to question the government or my interest in the welfare of teachers, a profession of which I was a proud member, a profession of which many members of my family participate. So if you're going to play politics today, you should keep it over there by yourself and not involve me in it. Thank you very much.
With respect, I'm not playing politics. I'm saying I hope what you said about pressure in the teachers.
We know exactly what you were doing. We know exactly what you were doing.
Sorry. Member Brown-Burke, go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, you had asked a question that Dr. Rainford had answered, and I'm not sure. I'm not even going to ask Dr. Rainford if this is her perception, but I can tell you some of the things that teachers tell me when they read the bill, why they are up in arms. First of all, you have to put it in a context that many teachers believe that the teaching council is not really helpful. Yeah? And I'm trying to choose my words carefully. And because they see that the current teaching council as not being helpful, they still see what we are doing as part and parcel of the same. And therefore, they see them as being punitive. And I believe with what we're doing, there is an opportunity, yes, for them to understand what we are trying to do, that we are trying to professionalize the teaching profession, and that this is not coming from that other place. And so whenever we have these decisions to make, I think we have to take that into account.
Chair, I want to thank Member Burke for her intervention, because I probably don't even have to intervene. I wanted to make that point. I want to make the exact point that, you know, one, clearly we have to listen, and I want to thank Dr. Rainford for sharing. But I think where we sit here is to fetter out some of the issues and to highlight that really what we're trying to do is to give the teaching profession its just due, you know, to really treat it as the most esteemed profession of professions. That's what it is, because all of us, whatever other professions we go into, started from a teacher. You know, the other thing, and I hope Member Brown won't make it, you know, something that he does regularly. We know that when we speak here and we ask questions here, we're not exposing government policy, right? He knows this, right? We get an opportunity here to oftentimes interact with experts that we would not necessarily interact with. And I think it's important for us to take the latitude to ask broad-based questions. And the member knows that. So I asked the member, I know it's hard, he's been around it for so long. The urge to be political, you know, pricks him sometimes. But he knows, right? And just because he raised that, I said, we are here to support our teachers. Minister Morgan said it. A number of us who sit here are products, literally products of teachers. We know in a real way what it is to grow up in the household of a teacher. The challenge, Minister, and you said it, Chair. You see, one of the challenges that it has been in this discussion, we have to try and fix multiple things at the same time. And, you know, in an ideal world, you don't want to fix X before Y. But because we are where we are, we have to professionalize the profession while looking to address issues of salary. You know, but we can't hold back and say we're not going to X because, you know, so all of these things have to come together. But I think we've had a really good discussion, and there's a lot of work to be done. But I really hope, and having sat with the technical team from the time when I was in education, the question, you know, what sometimes I laugh about, the majority of people who put these bills together are teachers. The technical people who sat to craft this bill would have spent years in the classroom. This is not political representatives coming and saying we need to, no. You know, and sometimes we don't tell those stories, Chair. Sometimes we don't tell those stories that most of these pieces of legislation to try to fix education, and we don't always get it right, but most of them derive from a good place. A place where you've seen the problems and you really are trying to address it. And, you know, maybe one of the things we should do is speak a little bit more about how we got to this process. Because I can tell you, having sat through it, you know, teachers crafted this bill.
Member Green, it's been 18 years in the making, this bill. 18 years, many iterations. So, yes, so we're here now, and at least 2 different deep dive study of the sector made the recommendation that there should be a Jamaica Teaching Council. All right. It looks like we're at a good place. Let me just thank everyone for being present this afternoon. Thank you to our presenter, Dr. Marcia Rainford, and her support, Dr. Diane McCullum. I know you did not say anything, but you were supporting.
Yes, couldn't do it without her.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. You have enlightened us about many things. And certainly I know that some of the things that you have said will be incorporated in our bills because they make good sense for us to do. Thank you so much for reading it and coming and just clarifying the various points about it. We appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, members. Hold on.
Move for the adjournment.
All right. No, not yet, not yet.
Oh.
But you're free to go, though. Yes, you're free to go. You're free to go. Okay. All right, so members, let me say that you will note that on the agenda today, we did not take the minutes. That's because they were not completed. So we're hoping that by next week, we will have at least last week's minutes to look at. Additionally, let me ask if there is any other business. None? All right. And let me tell you the dates of the next meeting. So we have the next meeting date would be Thursday, April 28, 2022 at 2 p.m. And then for future meeting dates, there is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022 at 10 a.m. and Tuesday, May 24th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Yes, this will be emailed out, but just wanted to give that to you. And so, okay, we have one other presentation that we know of. There may be two, but beyond that, then we'll start collating the information.
Minister, is from the, is there another presenter here today?
No, not today.
Okay.
Not today.
Okay.
Not today. Next week. They were not available today. That's the ecumenical church. So next week we will take them.
All right, move for the adjournment.
Yes,
Minister.
thank you, Member. Thank you, Member Green. Thank you. Yes.
Here's how we sign the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sign with me?
A major area in high school for me was IT and EDPM. I did that for 2 years, and from then I